As sons of a lay rabbi, my brother and I were often called upon to funeral services that my dad would conduct. I wouldn't be surprised if by the age of 17, my brother and I had been to at least a few dozen funerals. Some for family, while others were for people we didn't know so well. So I was very familiar with Jewish funerals and the traditions that come along with it. But what I wasn't prepared for is when a high school classmate was killed in an auto accident during our senior year. He was the senior class president, a multi-sport athlete, and honestly, just an all-around great guy. He lived just a block away, so we would spend quite a bit of time together. We would play tennis, baseball in his backyard. He taught me how to play table tennis. Not good enough to beat him, but he taught me enough to play. A favorite was sledding down what then appeared to be a monster hill. And if it was raining out, we would just sit in front of the TV and play Mike Tyson's Knockout on the Nintendo Entertainment System. It was October 30th, and he was driving home after attending the school's Halloween dance. He was dressed as Kenny Rogers, the gambler, and he nailed it. I believe his date was dressed as Dolly Parton, but I wasn't at the dance and my memory isn't quite what it used to be. When I was told what happened, time just stood still. I didn't know how to feel, as this was someone that I spent time with, went to 12 years of school with, competed with him on teams together and against him. My father consoled me best that he could. Then I just remember it was calling hours at one of the local funeral homes. And because we lived just a block away, we decided to walk. As we turned the corner towards the funeral home, I remember thinking to myself, holy crap. There was a line down the street for a couple of blocks. All I could hear was crying as we approached to pay our respects. We finally made it into the doors of the funeral home. We saw his younger sister, older brother, mother, and father, and then I froze. I looked towards the casket as I had many times before at the funerals I attended, but never in my life had I been to an open casket funeral. My friend lying there. As we made our ways through the line, I noticed his dad touching my friend's shoulder before shaking everyone's hand and thanking them for coming. Just as I heard on the way in, the tears remained on our way out. But it was shortly after leaving that I heard screams of terror coming from my brother. He also was traumatized after seeing the body of our once vibrant friend with nothing but a bright future ahead of him. I still think about him often, and when I do, I can't help but smile and sing, "You've got to know when to hold 'em, know when to fold 'em, know when to walk away, know when to run. You never count your money. When you're sitting at the table, there'll be time enough for counting when the dealing's done." In loving memory, Benjamin T. DeZonier, May 16th, 1976 to October 30th, 1993. Another incident that I recall was a friend of mine, Tim. He was my roommate my sophomore year. Tim was quietly hilarious. In order to help pay for school, he would substitute teach at the local high school. Like me, he wasn't a morning person, So when the call the substitute came in at 5:30 a.m., he had to evaluate how he felt from the night before. And surprisingly, he would accept almost every time they called him. However, there was this one particular morning that he received a call to come in, and I heard him say he wasn't going to be able to cover that day. My curiosity got the best of me, and so I asked him, "Tim, why didn't you accept?" He said, "Adam, I don't want to be an adult today. I want to be a college student." It was so Tim to just tell it how it was, no BS. Although I didn't know Tim for a long time, about a year and a half, I knew him long enough to build a bond, a very strong bond. That tends to happen when you live with someone. So to receive the news that Tim and his girlfriend were in an accident, the first thing that came to my mind was Ben. I asked the police officer if they were going to be okay, and the response I got sent me into an instant frenzy. The police officer said that Tim was killed in the accident and his girlfriend was fighting for her life. In that moment, there are so many questions. How did this happen? Where did it happen? And so many more. The passing of Tim was extremely difficult for all that knew him. In the coming weeks, we would have a special tribute on campus where friends could share their thoughts and we could say our final goodbyes to our friend. The university was incredibly supportive, checking in on the three of us as we tried to make sense of what was going on around us. The university prepared us meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner for the next couple of weeks. They provided resources for counseling and even reached out to our professors regarding the accident. Meanwhile, Tim's high school friend and roommate was at the hospital to support Tim's girlfriend, who was still fighting for her life. She had multiple painful surgeries, and he wanted to be there when she woke up from them. The news wasn't going to be easy to share, but he knew it would be even harder to hear. How do you tell someone that the person they love is no longer with them? Through the toughest of times, there still can be a silver lining. His girlfriend survived. She is still physically and mentally scarred from that tragic night, yet somehow was able to make lemonade from sour lemons. Tim's high school friend and roommate ended up marrying and have two beautiful twin girls. Talk about miracle of miracles. Don't get this twisted like a Jerry Springer episode. They didn't exactly care for each other at first. The typical buddy wanting to hang out with his boy, but girlfriend always ruined that. However, when you look at a lot of successful relationships or marriages, they're often woven together tightly with similar experiences. The accident, the grieving, the recovery were all experiences that brought them together in life. In loving memory, Timothy Douglas Hartley, April 15th, 1975 to November 21st, 1996. One more to share, my friend Jimmy. The only thing more unlikely to happen in my life, other than meeting the woman of my dreams, is becoming friends with Jimmy. I was first introduced to Jimmy when he told his cousins to steal my basketball from me as I was walking to the memorial school where a youth basketball tournament was being held. It was a short walk away, and in the 80s, kids still walked places. I was all of about 50 pounds soaking wet, with a body built by skin and bones. Jimmy and his cousins were known to be troublemakers. So when I saw them in the distance, I decided to cross the street to avoid any situations. Unfortunately, the orders had already been given, and two of his goons, I can call them that now because they would admit it and were good friends. They tried to wrestle the basketball from me. I'm not too sure why, but they didn't try too hard. It wouldn't have taken much more to take the ball. I later learned it was more of a "I'm bored, let's spice things up." They didn't really want to hurt me, just get a rise out of me. I was definitely shook, but determined to get out of there alive and with my basketball. Our next encounter was as if the first never happened. It was as if I had earned their respect. I invited them over to play basketball, and we did so for about 8 hours. And the only reason why we stopped was because it was getting too late and we didn't want to keep the neighbors up. It wasn't long before a bond formed between Jimmy and I. I quickly became family, except I was like the good angel sitting on his left shoulder. He was a lefty, so I made sure I was on his dominant side. I never tried to change who he was. I only shared what he was risking by the decisions he made. See, Jimmy was quite intelligent. Learning came easy to him. Unfortunately, that also made it extremely boring because he had so much extra time waiting for everybody to catch up. Not to mention, he had this bad boy vibe that he felt he needed to upkeep. But he was the most kindest person I've ever met. That was most noticeable when he lived with us for a short period of time. My brother and I were raised with manners, holding doors, please, and thank you were woven into the fabric of who we were. And Jimmy had that as well, just didn't show it as frequently. And he always wanted to one up us. He would ask to be excused from the table, clear everyone's dishes, and start to wash them. This is something that my brother and I tried to do in the past, but we were met with resistance from my mother, who liked to do the dishes her way. So when she didn't stop him from cleaning the dishes, my brother and I looked at each other like, what the heck's going on right now? As time passed, our friendship grew stronger and deeper. Conversations were deep about past experiences, life, and what the future had for us. Jimmy's mother raised him, his sister, and younger brother, which was very different than my upbringing. I asked a lot of questions, and Jimmy had no problem answering them, oftentimes on a very deep and philosophical level. When asked, "Do you like living here better?" he said, "One is not better than the other. I am grateful for both, as my mom provided me with everything I needed, and living with you provided me with things I will need to move forward." Admittedly, Jimmy wanted and needed a little more structure. Not too much, but a little more. I think of it as a new voice, saying the same thing, but for some reason, it is received this time. It's like when you go to a store and there's an issue in which the associate tries to handle, yet you demand to talk to the manager. A few minutes later, the quote unquote issue is resolved only to learn the manager said the same damn thing the associate said. That ever happened to you? As I mentioned, Jimmy was intelligent, but bored. He did love working, so much so that my brother and I had to pull him aside and give him a talking to. You've heard of grading on a curve. which means adjusting students' scores after an assignment using a bell curve. Well, Jimmy was messing up the bell curve when it came to work, physical labor, to be exact. We had chores to do like mow the lawns, rake the leaves, take out the trash, etc. And we weren't rewarded for doing anything quicker. Oftentimes, we would have to do more, so my brother and I had to have a family sit down with Jimmy and explain how things worked around here. Do what you're told, but not too fast, otherwise, there will be more to do. I never could understand how someone with so much intelligence was unable to follow simple directions. He literally only had one speed. I learned in high school and early on in college how difficult it was to lose a friend. Losing Jimmy would be no different. At just 22 years old, he too was lost in an auto accident. In loving memory, Jimmy James Sear, June 8th, 1975 to September 19th, 1997. The unexpected loss of a friend is impossible to make sense of. And the curiosity of what they would be doing today, if only they were still with us, is a constant reminder that tomorrow is never promised. Thank you for joining us on another episode of Dancing with Depression. There's a saying that hindsight is 20/20, which is often used to describe the phenomenon of being able to see things more clearly after they've happened. With that in mind, I encourage you to reflect back on past experiences in an effort to better understand your now. Also, I invite you to share with me your comments, thoughts, or personal exposure to depression. You can email me at dancingwithdepression@yahoo.com. Until next time, keep moving forward, and when it comes to depression, remember to take the lead.